He was a Pentagon insider, a veteran, an investigator, and today he's quite possibly the most important voice in the modern UFO movement.
I'm doing nothing more than finishing the job I was given.
Lue Elizondo risking his career, his family, and possibly his life to tell the story of what the American government really knows about alien craft.
And it's responsive and reactive.
Alien life.
There's zero information to suggest what they are doing is for benevolent reasons.
And the people in the Pentagon trying to hide the truth from you. There are forces, powerful forces, that don't want this story told.
And they'll go to great lengths to keep it a secret.
If aliens exist, where do they come from?
You know, people always say, well, these things are clearly from outer space. And I say, let's hold off on that.
What have they done to people?
Some of these people were very seriously injured.
And what do they want?
Hopefully they're not like us.
Tonight, you'll hear the jaw-dropping revelations.
I'm not saying it doesn't sound crazy. What I'm saying is it's real.
Lue Elizondo, Confessions of a UFO Hunter.
Unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Making more information public when it comes to unidentified anomalous phenomenon.
This object and mysterious ring that appeared over the skies of Oklahoma earlier this month.
Unless you've been asleep for the past 7 years, you've probably noticed our species is living through a UFO renaissance. Headlines, television specials, incident reports, and even congressional hearings into what are now called UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena.
We have things flying over military installations and no one knows what it is.
There are many people responsible for this resurgence of interest, but perhaps no one has played a bigger role than a muscle-bound man with tattoos, a soul patch, and one hell of a story to tell. He's Lue Elizondo, former Pentagon UFO investigator, and he's telling that story here on News Nation, and in a new book. Its tantalising title, Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. Your book title is Imminent. Something is about to happen. What's about to happen?
Well, if we're lucky, disclosure. The realization that the U.S. government is aware that the topic of UAPs is not only valid, but they're real.
The book lays out in vivid detail allegations that the United States military has been running a UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program for years and has even recovered alien bodies. Aliens, non-human intelligences, are real and they have been engaging with humanity.
Ross, we're not alone. We are not alone in this universe, and it is a simple fact. And the U.S. government has been aware of that fact now for decades.
The American public, the entire planet, is being lied to by the American government about what's really going on.
I think if the American public knew just how deep this lie went, that we would have a very significant constitutional crisis on our hands.
Why should you believe any of this? And who is this Elizondo character anyway? Well, it depends on whom you ask.
Very hardworking, very diligent, intelligent, and patriotic.
He is just a normal guy who is trying to do something extraordinary.
What defines Lue Elizondo?
Loyalty, transparency, honesty.
Officially, the Pentagon disputes what Elizondo says he's done and seen. But everyone agrees he's an Army veteran who has served in hotspots around the world, then oversaw counter-espionage and counter-terrorism investigations for the Department of Defense. In short, he's an American badass. You've been in combat situations, haven't you? You've been in life-threatening situations.
I've been in some very unfortunate situations, yeah. I've got a lot of regrets, and I want to make sure that whatever I've done in my life, serving the people in that building, I don't want to forget, even the bad things.
To make sense of the man and his claims, you need to go back to when it all started. That was 2009, when Elizondo was working as an intelligence operations specialist for the Department of Defense. He'd risen to the coveted GS-15 pay scale, the highest level federal employees can attain.
Remember, I was a senior GS-15 at the time, which is, pretty senior.
What's more, he'd set up a comfortable life in Kent Island, Maryland, with his wife Jen and their 2 daughters.
We had a really nice place to live. This was a great place to raise our kids, and it was just a really laid-back area to grow up, to raise a family and to live here.
But Elizondo says it all changed after he met this man, a renowned missile systems expert named Jim Lakatsky. He was running a program called OSAP.
He was running a program called OSAP, correct.
Which I have to read the acronym. It's the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. But you learned soon that what OSAP was investigating was not just advanced weaponry.
Yeah, I remember distinctly Jim pulling me into his office. He said, just bluntly, he said, "What do you think about UFOs?" And so I responded truthfully. I said, "I don't." I wasn't interested particularly as a kid into science fiction. I wasn't a big Star Trek fan or Star Wars fan. So I consider myself kind of a gumshoe investigator, old school, just the facts, ma'am kind of guy. And he said, "That's fair," but he said, "Make sure that you don't let your analytic bias get the best of you, and you have to remain open-minded."
He basically told you UFOs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, are real.
Yeah, so Jim told me, point blank, that they were studying and collecting information on UFOs.
Elizondo claims he was invited to join a program under the OSAP umbrella called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And soon that invitation became an initiation.
Oh, it was a bit of like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole. And it kept getting deeper and deeper.
Elizondo says his first real epiphany came during a meeting with a Brazilian Air Force general who'd come to brief them on a series of incidents in a city called Calares. Tell me what was happening.
These people, the townspeople, were being plagued by UFOs. In some cases, they were being pursued, and reports of these laser beam type, if you will, emissions were coming down and harming people to the point where the Brazilian government actually deployed doctors and the military to investigate. And then when they arrived, they substantiated. They encountered these UFOs, these UAP as well.
But Lou, I know the report of Calares. Officially, according to the Brazilian government, Calares didn't find any evidence at all.
Yeah. Well, that was not the case. And it was very clear that it was a very legitimate investigation. And what they found was that these things were coming in and out of the area and harming people.
As Lue went further down the rabbit hole, he says he learned that many of the classic UFO cases were, in fact, much more than legends, including the famous incident in Roswell, New Mexico. Roswell, 1947. What happened?
There was a UAP that crashed. In fact, there were 2 UAP that crashed, and one flew away while the other one did not, and it was recovered by the U.S. government.
You must appreciate people watching this, hearing you talking about aliens, recovered craft, recovered bodies. It sounds crazy.
Well, as I've said before, I'm not saying it doesn't sound crazy. What I'm saying is it's real.
Coming up, are alien abductions real? So people have been taken away from their homes and had things planted in them. Is there a connection between aliens and psychic powers?
This is real morphology occurring in the human brain.
And what happened when Lue started bringing his work home with him?
I had no idea what the hell I was getting myself into.
Stay with us. Former Pentagon UFO investigator Lue Elizondo writes in his new book, Imminent, that non-human intelligence has been engaging with humans for decades. So what do they want? There are many commentators who say they're friendly. They're no threat at all to humanity. Can we assume that?
Well, I think in order to understand if something is a threat, from a national security perspective, it's a very simple calculus. It's capabilities versus intent. we see some of the capabilities, and by the way, we can't replicate them. We have no idea the intent. So to presume or to assume that these things are friendly or they're hostile, there's not enough data.
Elizondo says the Pentagon's UFO investigators were keenly interested in the impact UAPs were having on individuals, especially military personnel.
There's enough reports that substantiate that not all these interactions are necessarily benign or peaceful. Some people leave terrified. Some people leave injured. There are U.S. service people. There is people that are on full 100% disability right now from the U.S. government because of an interaction with UAP. And it's in writing, by the way, from the U.S. government because of their involvement in an incident.
Indeed, the Veterans Administration has granted full medical disability benefits to this man, Airman John Burroughs, for injuries to his heart and eyes he claims he suffered during the famous 1980 UAP incident in Rendlesham Forest, England. And Elizondo says that's just the tip of the iceberg. Did you, in any of your UAP investigations, come across evidence of alleged abductions of humans by non-human beings?
We came across information that suggested that people were having things put inside their body that they did not give approval to.
So people have been taken away from their homes in the middle of the night and had things planted in them?
Something that was put inside their body, something invasive, right? Something that was not put there by their permission to do something.
You've seen one of those implants, haven't you?
I have been privy to some very interesting things.
This photo, he says, shows one of those interesting things. It's allegedly a biological sample removed from a US service member and submitted for analysis. This is possibly an alien implant.
Well, if you look, there's actually a piece of the chip sticking out and what appears to be these fibers that were moving on their own. And then it looks like this chip or whatever this is, this foreign object, is encapsulated by some sort of biological material.
Could that not be something biological, microbiological, or parasitic?
Well, it's certainly the outside looks like it's some sort of masking device. In essence, you have a foreign object, which it's a metallic object in there, and it seems to be encapsulated by some sort of biological material.
But how do you know it's not just a bit of metal that somebody's knocked into on a building site?
Well, in this particular case, this was moving on its own. It was actually had its own metabolic activity, and it terrified one of the doctors who was looking at this under a microscope. Said they didn't want to see this again.
But are UAPs abducting people at random, or are they drawn to certain individuals? Elizondo says research has revealed an intriguing pattern among UAP experiences in a fascinating part of the brain.
This is a part of the brain known as the quadrate putamen, and it is a very specific part of the brain. It's responsible for all sorts of stuff, and some have even speculated precognition
But certainly intuition.
Intuition for sure.
Elizondo says the caudate putamen is larger in people with alleged psychic powers, what the government has called remote viewing. What about people who've had UAP experiences?
Very interesting. The same thing. And by the way, that's not me telling you. These are medical doctors and scientists.
Stanford immunologist Dr. Gary Nolan has been researching this topic, and while his conclusions are not definitive, there are two working theories. One, that people with naturally large caudate putamen might attract UAPs like an antenna. Another, that UAP encounters with normal people cause that same part of the brain to get bigger.
And there is a lot of information to substantiate that this is real morphology occurring in the human brain.
Elizondo argues that people with enhanced caudate putamen might have a talent both for remote viewing and communicating with UAPs. And that's important because it's an established fact that the Pentagon has had an interest in remote viewing for military purposes.
In the vernacular, they used to call it psychic espionage. There was a program in the U.S. government, it's called Stargate. They were taking young soldiers and civilians and they were training them to conduct espionage behind enemy lines. And the term was called remote viewing. A lot of people that were in the remote viewing program had MRIs done of their brains, and a vast majority have that specific morphology. Do I think it's extraordinary? No, it may be a vestigial capability that humans had for a long time.
But does it work?
Oh, it absolutely works. It absolutely works.
You see, remote viewing has been discredited. The CIA determined that it doesn't work.
Okay, sure.
You're saying it does work?
It absolutely works.
Lue says he knows it works because he was trained in remote viewing himself.
I don't like to really publicly talk about it. My involvement was only tangential.
There's a story you tell of a terrorist suspect, and there was a remote viewing operation done that you were part of.
Yes, we did an experiment. Probably shouldn't have, but we did. And long story short, it appeared to be very effective.
That alleged capability for remote viewing and its potential connection to non-human intelligence may sound like a gift. But Lue says it was also, at least partially, a curse. He says that's because after years of studying UAP encounters, he began experiencing what's known in UAP circles as the hitchhiker effect. UAPs were appearing at his home, perhaps because he was attracting them. What started happening?
Oh, wow. Where do I start? Well, we would have these weird glowing balls of light in the house. They were green, they were small, they were diffuse, kind of like a little neon ball, and it really caused some disruption for my kids and my wife.
What were you seeing?
I would routinely see orbs.
What do you mean by orbs?
Small, little, spherical, green, lightish green type of color. And I'd be just walking down the hall, and I would just stop, and it would just continue to go right through the wall.
So we're talking about the hitchhiker effect. Something had followed Lue home from work.
Or by his very nature, yes.
How did he explain things? Was he able to talk about what was going on?
Not well.
I can imagine you were pretty angry.
I was very upset. The house had been turned upside down.
Yes, it sounds like the stuff of madness, tall tales, delusions. And anyway, where was the proof for any of this? But before Elizondo was through, the world would see it on video.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the SA. My gosh.
Stay with us. This is the video that would shock the world and change it.
2004 in November, the USS Nimitz carrier strike group were doing what they call workups off the coast of San Diego. And as they are doing this, there are two different radar arrays that are picking up these objects over the course of several days, dropping from 80,000 feet, and within about a second or less, all of a sudden being 50 feet over the water and hovering, and then popping back up again. So they vector the two F-18 aircraft, and they go to look at this thing. And long story short, after visually seeing this tic-tac looking object, roughly about the same length of a F-18 fuselage, performing in ways that we still can't replicate, bouncing around up and down.
So this is an intelligent technology.
This is absolutely, and it's responsive and reactive.
And it's not human.
It's not ours.
Though the Nimitz tic-tac incident had occurred back in 2004, Elizondo didn't see the video until 2009. And then in 2015, it happened again. Naval aviators attached to the USS Roosevelt recorded these two other videos during exercises off the coast of Florida. That also caught the attention of intelligence consultant and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Chris Mellon.
The Navy was experiencing a number of incursions into restricted airspace, and I met Lue at the Pentagon, began to hear about these incursions, And the more I learned, the more I realized that we had a potential disaster on our hands.
The videos remained undisclosed to the public for years, and it's easy to see why. These weren't just strange objects in the sky. They conformed to what ATIP would establish as the 5 observables.
My gosh.
So the 5 observables include instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, low observability, trans-medium travel, and anti-gravity. In essence, the ability to defy Earth's natural gravitational force without the associated technology or means to do it. The government has said that for the record. This is not our technology. You know, people always say, well, Lue, you know, these things are clearly from outer space. And I say, well, you know, let's hold off on that. I often tell people, look, they can be from outer space, inner space, or frankly, the space in between. There's a whole reality around us. There's life in the bottom of the ocean that live and thrive, and they survive off chemosynthesis, not the sun. And then we have life that's, you know, deep down in the Arctic ice that's thriving, and even on the ISS space station.
What do you find, though, the most plausible explanation for the intelligence that we're witnessing?
I mean, these things could be just as natural as we are. They could be from the oceans. We don't know.
Elizondo says ATIP also identified another pattern. In several instances, UAPs have allegedly appeared near American nuclear facilities or weapons systems. Both the Nimitz and the Roosevelt are nuclear-powered.
We do know that there is a very significant interest that UAP have towards our nuclear technology.
A daunting thought, to be sure. But Elizondo says ATIP also developed a hypothesis that the UAPs might have an Achilles heel, a vulnerability that the American military can exploit. Electromagnetic pulses of some kind could bring down these craft.
Yeah, the general consensus was that these vehicles, their propulsion units, are susceptible to electromagnetic pulse, meaning they are using a technology that the electromagnetism, if they were to encounter a certain frequency of electromagnetism, would interfere with their ability to fly and maneuver.
Building on that hypothesis, Elizondo says his team devised an audacious secret plan to disable and capture one of those Tic Tacs.
We had proposed a honey trap to try to collect data and information on these UAP.
So this was an operation known as Interloper.
That is correct. So you have a nuclear-powered carrier with other nuclear-powered vessels, potentially nuclear-powered submarines, which also may have potentially nuclear weapons. So the idea is to create a nuclear footprint that is so irresistible to these things, we would create a trap, and then that trap would be sprung.
But Operation Interloper never made it past the planning phase. Interloper was stymied, wasn't it? It was scrapped.
It was scrapped.
It was a pretty good idea.
And it was approved by a lot of people, a lot of agencies.
And yet, when it finally got to the top, it was stopped. It was blocked. It's almost like somebody perhaps already knew the answer.
Or didn't want us having the answer.
Elizondo says the shelving of Operation Interloper was just one of several puzzling and frustrating setbacks to ATIP's mission. And eventually he came to believe it was more than just bureaucratic inefficiency. Someone was trying to block his team from making progress.
I took an oath to the American people to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and it turns out that the enemy was elements in our own government. It was the bureaucracy.
That realization would lead to the biggest and riskiest decision of Elizondo's life.
Accomplish my mission, I knew I had to leave.
Stay with us. If it's true that the Pentagon's so-called legacy program has been secretly retrieving and studying non-human craft and even bodies, well, where are they? Area 51, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, or somewhere else? No one has come forward with those specifics. Not even famed military intelligence officer turned UFO whistleblower David Grush, who went public on News Nation last year.
Those details were not approved for me to talk about.
But now, Lue Elizondo is going there. There comes a point in your book where you name names. You name Lockheed Martin, TRW, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, BAE Systems, and the Aerospace Corporation as being some of the private corporations that are involved in working on retrieved alien technology. True?
It is true that it is in my book. Yep.
You also reveal how some non-human, alien biosamples are now being kept at Fort Detrick in Maryland, or with the FDA, and that they've been moved around so many times their origins have likely been forgotten. Elizondo claims that some of the answers, and perhaps the biological samples, can be found here at the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the FDA and the NIH.
Certainly we know that a lot of these samples were farmed out to experts like the National Institute of Health, NIH, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which absolutely fall under the authorities of this building. Logically, it makes sense that there are people in that building right now that may know the location of where these biological samples are.
The defence companies Elizondo names, the Pentagon and the Department of Health and Human Services, all categorically deny Elizondo's claims. He says those denials are only possible because he could never get the evidence to prove their involvement once and for all. Your investigations wanted to investigate those samples and you were denied access.
We were, yeah.
You became increasingly aware, didn't you, that there were people in the Pentagon, in the intelligence community, in private aerospace, who didn't want you investigating UAPs?
Absolutely. We began to run into some fierce resistance. And the more we continued to investigate, the increased level of that resistance became. There were elements, the only way I can describe them as religious fundamentalists.
It's a group that is euphemistically dubbed as the Collins elite, isn't it?
It is.
The Collins elite has long been rumoured to be a cabal of religious fanatics within the Pentagon. Many consider them a myth. Elizondo thinks otherwise.
That group is alive and well. It exists. I encountered elements of that group firsthand.
And they're gatekeepers inside the Pentagon who don't want the UAP story investigated.
That is correct, Ross. There are religious fundamentalists inside the Pentagon and inside the U.S. government, and specifically the intelligence community, that have a very, how shall I say, strict interpretation of their philosophical belief system.
Elizondo recounts one specific encounter with a high-ranking member of this so-called Collins elite.
He stopped me in the halls at the Pentagon. He said, "Have you read your Bible lately?" And I was kind of surprised by the question. Like, I mean, I know what the Bible says. What, may I ask specifically, what do you mean? He says, "And you know what we're dealing with are demons. These are demonic beings, and we shouldn't be looking at them."
But aside from potential religious motivations for the secrecy, Elizondo suggests there could also be geopolitical considerations at play. Do the Russians and the Chinese have recovered craft?
I can't speak on behalf of what the Russians or Chinese or any adversaries may have or may not have.
Well, could that be driving our concern that we don't want to show our hand?
There's always a concern when a foreign adversary is looking at something. There is this cat and mouse. We don't want the adversaries to know what we have, and we also don't want the adversaries to know what we don't know, right? So there's always a reason not to broadcast what you know and don't know to your enemy.
Whatever the motivations for the alleged cover-up, Elizondo says it went way beyond mere bureaucratic foot-dragging. People were threatened, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Some of our folks were told, if you're not careful, we're going to do exactly to you what we did with the Rosenbergs. You're done.
So people are being threatened with death if they talk about this?
Sure, because, and by the way, people say, oh, the government would never do that. Try getting on Area 51. There's signs on the fence that say lethal force is authorized. You absolutely can use lethal force to protect national security investments and equities. That, we do it.
Elizondo describes the mounting obstructions, the denied requests, the scrapped plans, the threats, and above all, the steadfast refusal to disclose any of this, either to the public, the Congress, or even the President. By early 2017, it had all become too much. So there came a time during your work with ATIP where you just decided, I'm getting nowhere, I'm getting blocked, I'm getting stymied. What did you decide to do?
I went public. I resigned.
How hard was it for you to write this letter?
Oh. Yeah, this letter is my resignation memo to the Secretary of Defense. Probably the hardest memo I ever had to write.
In the letter addressed to Defence Secretary James Mattis, Elizondo said he was quitting because, despite overwhelming evidence, certain individuals in the department remain staunchly opposed to further research on the controversial topic of anomalous aerospace threats. Because you wrote that memo and circumvented your immediate bosses,
yeah.
What did they do?
Well, they made my life hell.
Hard times were ahead, but Elizondo was about to make some hell of his own, as he and those explosive videos were about to go public.
I'm doing this because I believe it's the right thing to do.
Stay with us. On December the 16th, 2017, the world woke up to a bombshell. Lue Elizondo, working with Chris Mellon, had gone public with the now famous Nimitz Tic Tac video.
I contacted 3 different news organizations, and eventually the New York Times editors were persuaded they had enough to do a front-page story.
The New York Times published an explosive article revealing the Pentagon's secretive UFO program.
Reports the U.S. government is still collecting information about encounters between unknown aircraft and our military.
Elizondo spent 10 years as head of a secret study of unidentified aerial objects.
When the story broke, this covert operator who'd worked in the world of intelligence suddenly became an international public figure. What was it like?
It was terrifying. I had spent my entire life living in the shadows. As an intelligence officer, anonymity is your friend. Coming out was for me one of the most difficult experiences.
Suddenly, Lue Elizondo's face became synonymous with the UFO question. And now, with his days at the Pentagon behind him, Lue devoted himself to the cause. He took a job with To the Stars Academy, a UFO research and advocacy group founded by rock star Tom DeLonge. Together, they appeared on History Channel's Unidentified, Inside America's UFO investigation, which garnered him even more fame. Someone even started selling t-shirts with his face, but that attention came at a price.
There were a lot of positives, but things also were about to get bad, weren't they?
I did not think that our lives would be this turned inside out for this many years. It's exhausting. It's exhausting.
You suffered retribution, and in fact the Office of Special Investigations in the Air Force began a criminal investigation against you, didn't they?
They did.
What happened with that?
The initial allegation was that I was responsible for unauthorized disclosure, and then I stole classified videos out of the Pentagon and a whole bunch of stuff. And long story short, the Air Force OSI came back and said, nope, actually we seized the computers, there's no wrongdoing, didn't take anything home, and he never had a conversation about anything classified. Everything's unclassified.
Publicly, the Pentagon has also denied Lue's claim that he was the head of ATIP, both in prior public statements and directly to News Nation for this report, effectively calling him a liar and a fraud.
Take ISIS, I'll take Al-Qaeda, whatever. Those don't scare me. Those don't bother me. What bothers me is when people question my loyalty, my intentions of what I'm trying to do. That cuts deep.
What do you think yourself of the fact that the Pentagon, as you describe it, has been actively trying to discredit Lue?
I think it's shameful. This is how you're repaid. It makes no sense to me. It makes no sense.
We need to have an intelligence community that is willing to speak truth to power. Here comes a guy who does that and clearly is correct. Does he get an award for identifying a huge, major vulnerability in America's air defense like he should? No, he gets harassed by these bureaucrats because he's doing stuff that is inconvenient.
On top of the reputational attacks, Lue and his family were uprooted from their home. as Lue's new job at To the Stars Academy called him to California. Then the job fell through.
You'd essentially gone from fairly steady jobs, well paid in Maryland, and you'd basically taken a complete financial bath.
I had to get a job at Target, and then after that I got a job at Home Depot.
The family went from their house in Maryland to this mobile home.
Does it frustrate you sometimes that people perhaps don't understand the sacrifice that you and Lue and your family have had to endure?
Yeah, especially because everyone thinks we have all this money. Oh, they're just grifting. Come live for a day in my life. I guarantee you will run back to yours.
Why is this worth it, Lue? I mean, you were a GS-15 in the senior executive service of the Defence Department. You ended up having to dig your own pit toilet. You couldn't continue to pay your rent. Why is it worth it?
I have 2 daughters and I have a wife, and we have been through hell. But there's a lot of people who had a lot worse than me. I feel terrible because the stress I have put my family through and what they've had to endure.
Some relief finally came in April 2021, when Senator Harry Reid wrote a letter confirming Lue's role in ATIP.
It's in black and white.
Personal vindication aside, Elizondo says he's most proud of the momentous shift that's taken place in the national conversation on the UAP question, both among the general public and on Capitol Hill. In 2022, lawmakers passed legislation that called on the DoD to create a UAP office which would report to Congress. That office is now known as the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO.
You have come a long way since 2017. What's been achieved?
I'm most proud of the fact it's being openly discussed in the halls of the Pentagon. That means that the stigma and the taboo is finally evaporating, and we can begin to see the topic more clearly.
Unidentified objects in any domain pose potential risks to safety and security, particularly from military personnel and capabilities.
With the testimony of the first AARO director, Sean Kirkpatrick, in 2023, it seemed like the UAP renaissance had officially commenced. But would it really be an age of enlightenment?
What he was saying is not consistent with the truth. And when someone like that blatantly tells you something that is not true, you've got a serious credibility problem.
Stay with us.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
On the 26th of July 2023, Navy pilot Ryan Graves, Navy Commander David Fravor, and former Air Force Intelligence Officer David Grush testified at a congressional hearing heard around the world.
I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program.
How did it feel for you, that moment?
It was a very profound and proud moment for me. So you had 3 military personnel testifying on the reality of UAP. Now that's historic.
Whistleblower David Grush came on News Nation and made an earth-shattering claim.
It felt, for a moment, like the dam was breaking, that full disclosure was about to happen.
The American people deserve to know the truth on this.
But it didn't work out like that. First, AARO denied David Grush's claims. Then, like Lue, Grush became the subject of a vicious discrediting campaign, including his own medical history.
And they try to discredit him, just like they try to do me, just like they try to do anybody else who comes out and steps out of rank.
What's more, AARO has publicly declared that it has found no evidence to support any claims of a government UAP retrieval program. As for the UAP captured on those famous videos, yes, they remain unidentified. But while the Pentagon says AARO will follow the data wherever it leads, it says it has not found any credible evidence of extraterrestrial activity.
So do you think that people like Sean Kirkpatrick are operating according to a dictated agenda, that they're being told to try and suppress interest in the UAP?
What I can tell you is that what he was saying is not consistent with the truth. And when someone like that blatantly tells you something that is not true, you've got a serious credibility problem.
Dr. Kirkpatrick told News Nation, "At no time did I provide false information to Congress. In fact, my team provided actual evidence, something that all of the other claimants have failed to do."
Why haven't you appeared before Congress yet? There must have been numerous opportunities.
Well, sure, but there's only been one public hearing so far. There's going to be more, and it's not up to me, but I can tell you I've been asked, and my response was absolutely, I will testify.
Lue's a patriot, isn't he?
Yes.
What's driving him?
He feels that humanity is owed this information. People should know if we are not alone, no government has the right to keep that hidden.
A growing public movement seems to agree, as interest in the UAP question continues to intensify, both online and at UAP conferences around the country. Plus, there's been a veritable avalanche of former military officers coming forward with similar claims, including Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet and Colonel Cal Nell.
Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new.
And military-grade UAP videos are now popping up regularly, like this one over Puerto Rico, this one along the Arizona border, and this one over an undisclosed conflict zone in the Middle East.
This is more than intriguing, more than provocative. It's potentially revolutionary and transformational.
What can people do? What should any citizen do? How can they help you?
Get involved. Talk to your members of Congress. Ask questions, whether it's around the dinner table or the water cooler. That's what I would encourage people to do. Start asking the hard questions.
So Lue Elizondo, crystal ball. Let's go 1-2 years in the future. Are we going to be as much in the dark then as we are now?
No. But you know, disclosure isn't a sprint. It's a marathon. It's not going to happen overnight. Disclosure isn't an event, it's a process. I think this next generation, if our kids are any indicator of hope, that's where real disclosure is going to occur.